Hello, this is Sunday Profile. I'm Richard Aedy. Today, Barack Obama's digital strategist. Joe Rosebars is in the engagement business. His firm, Blue State Digital, helps organisations make connections, whether we're talking about a museum, a charity, a business, or, famously, a football team. All of them are after an emotional relationship, a sense of community with the people who give them money. Joe Rosebars works with social media, email, and other digital technologies to achieve this. But he learned his chops on the Howard Dean campaign to be Democratic nominee for president in 2004. And he's gone on to use this knowledge to stunning effect on Barack Obama's two successful presidential campaigns. In last year's election, Joe Rosebars' efforts generated a grassroots army of 13 million, all dedicated to re-electing the US president. 4.5 million donated money to the campaign online. Many of them gave more than once.
Those contributions came in mostly online from people who were just supportive of the campaign. And so we tried to have as open a relationship as possible with our supporters to give them a real look inside the campaign, to give them a real sense of ownership over it. And over time, that sense of ownership takes on multiple components. One is a financial contribution, hopefully, but also people spending time making phone calls to voters, knocking on doors, turning up for events, reaching out to their friends and sharing content offline or on Facebook, for instance. But in general, feeling a sense of ownership over the campaign, of which the financial contribution is just a part.
Yeah. And what you're after, I suppose, is different levels of engagement with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we wanted to have a relationship with as many people as possible, but we also wanted those relationships with each individual to be as deep as possible. And that meant getting into the content creation business in a way that gave people different hooks and ways to think about and explain the kinds of things that the president had accomplished or that he wanted to do in a second term, but also to tell the story of the movement as it came together and what people's role in it could be and ought to be and over time was.
Was it very different doing it the second time around? I mean, in 2008, you had this candidate who had only, done half a Senate term and was all about potential, and the big theme was hope and change. This time, you had a president who'd been the incumbent for 4 years. Surely the tone and the atmospherics are different.
Yeah, I think in 2008, we were at the end of the Bush era. And quite literally, the economy collapsed. In the end, in the general election there, and people were definitely ready for something different. It was also just a different campaign in the sense that we were the challenger up against Senator Clinton, and so we had a much smaller organization that was really in a couple of different stages, a startup and a sort of an improvised organization that we did the best we could to go through to build to the early, caucus and primary states in Iowa and New Hampshire. In South Carolina, and then that long primary that seemed to never end was a whole other organizational exercise, and then the general election, which was short, but also very turbulent, with the economy and John McCain suspending his campaign and Sarah Palin and all the rest, and so it was a very different political environment, but also one where people could get involved and based on their belief of what was possible. In the second campaign in 2012, obviously, it was a different political environment. We had just come off of the stinging midterm elections in 2010, and we had much more time to build something. So we began in the beginning of 2011 and really put together an organization that was built for, that full 18-month period, building towards that single election day, and realizing that we had, the opportunity to build something to tell the story of what had happened for the first term, but also to lay out a promise and the notion of a choice for what would happen in the second term. And indeed, with the time and the level of organizational prowess that we had in 2012 and bringing some of the lessons from the nonprofit and private sector, that we learned in between in 2009 and 2010 to bring to bear an organization that actually got more people involved than we did in 2008, and that had more donors and more volunteers and got more new people registered to vote.
So how does that manifest from a voter's perspective? If you take, for example, say I'm a 35-year-old, single parent, I live in Arizona, I got one child. how does that campaign, is that tailored to me?
Yeah, I mean, it would depend on if you were someone who had participated in the political process before and were registered to vote or not. It would be someone. It would be different if you were someone who was always a reliable voter, but might be persuadable in our direction, or whether you were someone who was definitely for us and but who we needed to make sure you were going to turn out. And so we looked at the electorate in those three different categories. In each state, our vote goal and what we needed to do to win in that particular state was a composition of those three factors. It's funny you should mention Arizona because in our case, one of our best stories was of a woman who has a daughter who was a supporter in 2008 named Stacy Lynn, and she volunteered for us in Arizona and helped campaign for universal health care, obviously. And then in the intervening time between the two campaigns, had a daughter who was born with a hole in her heart, and so she wound up benefiting from the Obamacare coverage for pre-existing conditions, and that became something very, very real in her life that she fought for in 2008, but then in 2012 had benefited from and became a vocal supporter of, because that was one of the key issues in the campaign, that the Republicans said they'll repeal the Obamacare law, completely and in full. And indeed, we told her story from the campaign perspective. We made a documentary about her, and eventually she wound up speaking from the stage at the Democratic National Convention in the summertime in 2012. She's not a connected person. She's not an elected official or a party stalwart. We were able to make her the centerpiece of how we communicated about what the Obamacare accomplishment meant for people in real life in a very concrete way, and that helped shape the conversation.
Yeah, and what I'm struck by is that it's not about anymore politicians telling the story that they want to tell us about the country or the jurisdiction they hope to win. You're harnessing everybody's stories to turn them into advocates, and because all of us find the power of story so strong.
Yeah, I think that's a unique feature of Barack Obama, though, that we were blessed with, was that his story was one of leading by organizing. He's a person who got his experience and chose a career path helping folks in an economically distressed area of the south side of Chicago come together and figure out how to bring jobs back to their community and how to bring the services that they needed from government. And he did that not by standing up on a soapbox and saying, "Hey, follow me because I'm going to solve all your problems." He stood in church basements and community centers and said, "Let's all come together and talk about what needs to happen and how we're going to do it together." And that's a spirit that animated the campaign both times. But it's a notion of why each of us is connected to each other in a political process and in a civic process that he tells when he speaks to people, but that really is his theory of change and how to get things done.
What was his reaction to your work? Because I know from my addiction to the West Wing that those sort of personal moments with leaders have enormous impact on staff members.
Yeah, he's one of the favorite aspects of the campaign is there's obviously we did a lot of small dollar fundraising, but also a lot of the major donor stuff as well. And he would have to go to events and hotel ballrooms and speak to roomfuls of people and whatnot. But we did this thing once every month or two called Dinner with Barack, where we turned the traditional political fundraising on its head and had him spend an hour and a half with 4 donors, but not 4 like impressive, important, big dollar donors, but 4 people who had just given whatever amount and chipped their name into the raffle to have dinner with him. And when he would come in, he would be genuinely excited because for all the efforts that he could make the time to do during the campaign, because he's obviously got a day job being president, he knew that this was both one of the highest impact because a contest to have dinner with him where people are chipping in $5 would raise far more than he ever could, for selling $1,000 tickets to a gala or something like that. This would be $11-15 million raffle drives that would result in those 4 people being in the room. So he knew he was, that hour and a half was like a good use of his campaign time. But more importantly, he really just enjoyed talking to regular, normal people about what was going on and engaging them in their lives and what was important to them, but also, taking their questions about things like, we had one of these right after that first debate. And it was really something to hear his supporters and to hear his tone and words of accountability to them for his performance in the debate and how they talked about it and how he was preparing for the second one. It's just really incredible to see him really interact with and feel a part of a team really that was making this election happen.
But how much of both victories, but perhaps especially the second one in 2012, was about the fact that essentially your side, the Democrats, grasped this power of story, harnessed social media, and for you it wasn't all about lots of TV advertising. It was more from the bottom up.
Well, for us, it was a all of the above strategy. We ran a bunch of TV advertising, of course, but we placed it and created it in a smarter way than campaigns ever had before. But simultaneously, we also built a grassroots army of people who were delivering messages to the targeted voters in their own voice and in their own communities. And this took a very practical turn when we launched a tool called targeted sharing on Facebook that allowed for you, if you connected your Facebook account to BarackObama.com, it allowed us to show you who among your friends were our best guess at who might not be registered to vote, but should be. Or we could also show you which of your friends, if you connected your Facebook account to us, we could show you which of your friends we think should be voting early during the early voting period in Iowa. And that's something that for all of the TV ads that we run or mailers that we send out or email or whatever the campaign's doing, it's a much more persuasive and powerful thing for your friend or your family member or your colleague to do that and deliver that message to you, whether it's through email or social media or ideally a knock at the door or a conversation at the water cooler.
Were you worried that at some point that your opponents, the Republicans, that the penny was going to drop for them, that they would take this approach too? Because they really didn't.
It's not for lack of trying that they weren't able to pull it together. I think it's a little bit more related to a lack of purpose. I think that you saw the Romney campaign go through a primary process on the Republican side where they could basically raise a bunch of money from big donors giving 6 and 7 and sometimes 8-figure checks and obliterate their opponents on television. It's not a grassroots contest that happened during the primary. And so if you're Mitt Romney and his strategist, you're thinking, well, that just got me through there. We can rely on the outside super PACs and the sort of dark money organizations and the RNC, which has a different kind of fundraising mechanism than a campaign, and they're going to take care of this for us and just blast this Obama guy out. And that was how they viewed their path to victory. So there wasn't this notion of an absolute essential investment in grassroots politics and in getting a whole lot of people on board. And so they didn't do that. There was a lot of gimmickry. There was a lot of energy and money spent, especially on consultants and media and everything else for digital. But it wasn't something that they viewed at the end of the day as essential to their path to victory. And that's something that had they needed to build grassroots and get a whole lot of people involved in really giving their time and being passionate, the ability to do that at scale requires a certain level of authenticity and consistency of message and, frankly, policies that a lot of that would benefit a majority of Americans. And I'm not sure that the reality of the agenda and the particular Republican coalition that they were trying to put together would support, the requirements of putting together something like that.
This is Sunday Profile. I'm Richard Aedy, and with me today is Joe Rosebars. Joe was Barack Obama's principal digital strategist and advisor in the 2008 and 2012 election campaigns. I want to ask about you, Joe, because you actually got involved originally, I think, with the Howard Dean campaign. That's in 2004. You were really young then, weren't you?
Yeah, I was 22, and I showed up in Burlington, Vermont. Dean was the governor of Vermont, and that's where his campaign headquarters was. And I showed up there without the promise of a job or even being let in the building. But luckily, I was one of the last ones in before they got the security cards and managed to get a folding chair and an Ethernet cord because Wi-Fi didn't exist in that office. And worked my way on and was hired after a few weeks.
What did you think you could bring when you first walked in that door?
Well, to be honest, I thought I could bring 100 hours a week of my time, and I had about 6 weeks worth of money to live on. And I figured, I'd do that for 6 weeks, and if I didn't get a job, then I could bag groceries for 50 hours because we were in an office building behind the Price Chopper supermarket, and so I could do that for half the time and then go work at the office the other half of the time. But it was passion and energy and a willingness to do anything, and so what I wound up doing was writing for the campaign in speeches, op-eds, press releases, letters, but also for the campaign emails that were going out and the blog. And over time, gravitated much more towards the digital side because you get that instant response. If you're posting on the blog, you get to see the comments, and people are sharing it or linking it. When you send out an email, you see how many people are opening it and what they're doing with it, and if people are answering the call to action to attend an event or make a contribution. And so for me, the ability to optimize and improvise in real time was a lot more fun than litigating sentences and speeches.
And where does the interest in politics come from? Is that from childhood?
We weren't a political household, really. I think it came from school. I remember elections happening and things like that. When I was 11, was the '92 election with Bill Clinton. I remember sort of observing that with some curiosity. But it was really in high school when I was taking my U.S. history and civics courses that the impeachment drama around President Clinton went down. And it just seemed like such a contrast between what was going on in present-day politics and what people were debating on the floor of Congress. And, in school, I'm, reading about the Federalist Papers and why we have a Congress set up the way we do. And so that was something that seemed to me to merit some exploration. And over time, the ability to affect that process seemed like a good way to make change in what was happening, because the stakes are so high and the process is sometimes so silly that even if you don't feel like you have a ton of credentials or qualification to go into it, that if you could put your heart and soul into a campaign and affect the outcome, that seemed a way to get a lot of things done that you care about.
You went to university pretty early, I think. I think you were first there when you were something like 16. Were you always hoping to go into this field?
No, I started out as a philosophy major when I went to college, and wound up taking a political science degree after bouncing around to different universities here and in Europe. But it was, not more than a passing interest, and still not something I really intended, or I guess I have a career in politics now, but it's not something that I particularly enjoy in terms of the political process and the sort of silly nonsense side of politics. I enjoy getting people together and the civic side of it, but the politics side can be frustrating and at times feel very trivial. And I think that's something that we have in this country, particularly a real challenge as our political process seems to get more silly and more degraded. Keeping good people interested, whether it's at a candidate level or at a staff level or at a volunteer or giving their time or chipping in their $5 level, is a very difficult question for us.
So it's that working to engage people, working to use stories. That's the thing that kind of floats your boat rather than the politics. Or what about policy development? Are you interested in that?
I'm interested in these things, but the notion of participation seems to be the highest impact thing for me, and my business, Blue State Digital, is focused on that kind of participation across civic life. And so we work with advocacy groups, we work with NGOs, we work with cultural institutions like museums, and we work with brands to tap into whatever that passion is that they have and that connection they have with people, and then to try to deepen it in a way that is genuinely meaningful for the individual, but also has an outcome, for the business or the organization or the campaign. And I think marrying those two objectives, where you can have a deeper relationship with someone, and that people can have deeper relationships with each other in the context of a campaign or in the context of both being members of a local museum. That's something that's really rich, but also has knock-on effects for whatever the mission of the organization is.
The other example I was reading about that you work with is the Green Bay Packers. Fans of the football team that are kind of legendary, but not everybody lives where they play.
That's right. We work with the American football Green Bay Packers on a program called Packers Everywhere. So if you're a Packers fan who lives, in the rest of the country or even in certain spots around the world, you can find other Packers fans near you. And this is a unique thing for Green Bay because they're the most popular team in the smallest market of any of our major sports here, and Green Bay is a tiny town in Wisconsin. They are sold out forever. They don't need to sell tickets. They have 100% approval rating in Green Bay, and so the question is, how can they build and deepen their relationships with fans that they have around the country? And so, if you're traveling on business, in San Antonio, Texas, you can find the local Packers bar, using your Packers Everywhere app and see the pictures from last week's game of who was there and what it was like. And if you happen to live in a city where the Packers go to play an away game, like say Atlanta, you're invited to come to a big Packers Everywhere rally where you and a couple of thousand other folks will come and the Packers will be there. They'll have a presence. Stars of the past will come and address you, have food and fun and make a real sense of community from folks who otherwise might be very lonely showing up to see their team at what is an away game.
Yes. Where you can buy a cheesehead too. I think that's important.
That's right.
So if we go back to the politics, you're involved in 2004 and in 2008, 2012, and now you're back to what's become the day job. Obviously, Barack Obama can't run again. What about you, though? Do you think that next time around you'll be involved with the Democrat campaign?
I hope that in some way we're able to provide the infrastructure for our side to succeed. And whether that's with the campaign or the party or other groups, we have lots of clients in the advocacy space, so trade unions and causes that are all part of the broader movement. But my interest is in building a team of great people to have as broad as possible an impact on the things that we care about. And so we're 150 people now, and I have no doubt that some of those folks are going to go work on multiple campaigns in 2016 on the Democratic side, because there's likely to be a primary. And I hope that our ethos and the way that we approach things and the technology we've built out of two campaigns, can go into all of them.
And the other thing I'm guessing is, although you're still a young man, I think you're about 32 now, it's probably not as possible to do the insane weeks and survive on Red Bull, is it?
I discovered during 2012 that it's a much younger person's game, and I turned 30 on the 2012 campaign right after it started, and it became clear very quickly that the 23 and 25 year olds really had the energy and the stamina to do it. It's not something I recommend from a personal life and health perspective.
One more before I let you go, Joe. Here in Australia, you may be aware that we have a minority government, and it's the Labor Party's in charge. Our election will be in September, and things are looking very dire for Labor and for the Prime Minister. Any advice on what the ALP can do to better engage its community?
It's really up to any organization, whether it's a political party or an NGO or an advocacy group, and I think there are a lot of players that will be participating in the election, not just the parties, to get out there and give people some ownership over the brand and to give people the tools they need, whether that's how to talk about accomplishments or policy proposals, or the organizational wherewithal for people to feel like they have a way to meaningfully interact with and lead in their communities. Yeah, the organizations have to take ownership of that problem, and I think that's something that we saw. Campaigns in the U.S. in 2008 and 2012 decide to tackle differently from an organizational perspective and make different bets on what was important to their path to victory. And I'm happy to have worked for President Obama because The path to victory was also the genuine and authentic way to leave the political process better off than how we found it. And that was very meaningful to me, and something we talked about, when I interviewed for the job the first time. That was a priority for him to leave the process better off because of how we did the campaign, no matter what the result.
Joe, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks very much.
Joe Rosebars, Barack Obama's digital strategist in the last 2 presidential campaigns and chief executive of Blue State Digital. The program is produced by Belinda Sommer. I'm Richard Aedy. Thanks for listening.